Hey guys, welcome to our living room. This is the crew's living room. This is where the parenting actually takes place.
The magic happens.
The magic happens here. And I can't talk about parenting or parents versus kids without including my better half. And I really give Tara the credit for our kids turning out the way that they have. And so I wanted her to be able to speak into this space. And Tara, as you know, we're asked all the time by parents, especially with little kids, like what is the secret sauce? As you kind of reflect on all of these ages and stages that we've been through, like what would you say are the big moments or the big kind of like overarching values that have allowed us to parent the way we have? I haven't said we haven't parented perfectly, but I think we've parented well.
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
Yeah. I would say first and foremost, probably just a ton of prayer.
Amen.
It takes a lot of prayer. But I mean, that is so true that there should be so much grace given because nobody parents perfectly. We all just do our best. But you know, I think there are definitely some things that help, some things that have helped us along the way. One of the core things that we set out for our kids is we developed a mission statement. As with most things in life, they just go better with a mission statement. And so we had a mission statements that you and I knew. I don't know necessarily if that was before our kids, but we did impress these things on our kids. The mission statement was just that we wanted our kids to be passionate about God and to love others well, and also for our home to be a place that they would always want to come back to. And those were our core values, and that was very important to us. And so
and we repeated that a lot.
We
like
did,
throughout.
probably not to our kids, but
No,
I mean the
to
love
each
God
other.
part, but yes, absolutely to each other. And then we had some non-negotiables as well, and these we did keep in front of our kids, and it goes back to loving God and others well. Another huge non-negotiable for us was for our kids to have just be respectful of authority, all authority that is in their life, not talk back to authority. It was just something really important to us. And also that our kids would just love the homeless and the hurting and befriend the kids at school that didn't have anybody around them. And I know we've spent so many times before the first night of school just reminding the kids that be mindful of those kids around you and be sure and befriend those, that are hurting and don't have those friends. So those things we were. And just to go back to Jim had spoken about Deuteronomy 6 earlier, but Deuteronomy 6:7, just impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. And I just think that when you have those non-negotiables, you just find all those opportunities to just be just keeping those things in front of your kids and just reminding them of the things that are super important, not only to us, but hopefully to them as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've been talking through over this week, just knowing that we've been in this series, Family Matters, do you think we're overprotectors, in our parenting style?
We definitely were.
We were those parents too.
We definitely were those parents. I did ask Kylie, and this takes kind of thick skin, but I did ask Kylie, if you could go back and there's something that we could change in our parenting, because obviously we didn't do perfect, we know this, what would it be? And she said, I feel like you kind of led with fear a little bit, and that definitely is true. I totally own that. We definitely were probably overprotective, and we probably did lead with fear more than we should, and that is probably something that we would not do. Especially, I can't even imagine if it were today's day and age, things have changed so much.
But some of that was justified. I mean, especially in this day and age where every kid, it seems like, is on a phone.
Yeah,
which to me, I mean, we were parenting right at the beginning of that whole new, I guess, cultural shift. And now it's like, I mean, I've seen 8-year-olds with iPhones in their hands. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
It's pretty crazy, yeah.
So in the tips about protecting, what would be a good balance? What do you think?
Yeah, so I just think that, as a parent, more than likely they have a phone that you own, that you are entrusting to them. And so I think it's okay to be able to check on their phones and check on their apps. And we've always said, after 10 p.m., you probably don't need your phone. Nothing good happens after 10 p.m. It's going to disrupt sleep. So
I need it for the alarm clock.
yeah, you get an alarm clock.
You go old school. Go get them one at Target.
We did it and we were fine. So yes, so I think, pulling phones, I think, limiting screen time, especially with little kids. They've done so many studies about, depression and anxiety tied to phone use. So I think limiting screen time is always a good thing. Having parental controls on your internet. I mean,
so good.
Kids, especially teenagers, do not need to have free reign when they're really young with the internet. It's just there's too much bad stuff looking for them, and
what's troubling, and it keeps getting younger and younger, it feels like, but the average age that a child in America is first exposed to pornography is 9 years old now. Crazy. That is just thinking of a 9-year-old trying to process these images is just so heartbreaking to think about the devastation of that. Yeah. So we gotta
can't take that moment back.
We gotta protect our kids because nobody else is. Our culture isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And even our kids didn't spend the night at other kids' house.
It's true.
Because we didn't know what they had at their house. We didn't know who was visiting at their house. Even if we knew the parents, we didn't know the aunts and uncle. We didn't know what they had access to. Yeah, I mean, they could come to our house, but our kids didn't go to.
I think pastors, firefighters, and police officers are probably the most protective parents.
For sure.
Because we're seeing all the stuff.
Yeah.
And we know, that even though that mom and dad, on the soccer team, they're amazing and their kid gets along with your kid, you don't know who's staying at their house, and you don't know behind closed doors, what that family is into, even though they're projecting this image on the soccer field or on the soccer team. So you just got to be aware of that.
Yeah. So we talked about fear-based earlier. So Psalm 91 talks about God as a refuge and our shelter. So there's a difference between shelter and imprisoning. Love shelters and fear imprisons.
That's so
you
good.
Always want to walk that balance of you want to shelter your kids as much as you can and then let go of what you cannot control.
That's so good. That's so good. What other things kind of come into your mind as a mom, and especially as a mentor mom now with all these younger moms that you're talking to?
One of the things I think that is so crucial with raising kids is the communication aspect. And I think that it's such a huge thing. I think that you have to really be mindful of being available for your kids.
Oh, so good.
I loved driving our kids to and from school. I was so bummed when my kids all turned 16 because that was taken from me. But I just loved that time. I loved the communication we had and the late nights when your teenager comes in, and those weren't always as much fun. Those were kind of trying. But just being available. Yeah. And I just read something the other day that I thought was so good, and it said, try to synchronize your brain with where your kids are at. Try to get into their world and see things from their perspective. And I just think that's so important. And I just think that kids just want to be heard. And I was speaking with Kylie, and I was like, do you feel like we did a good job with that? And she goes, there were times where you guys would pick me up and take me to my favorite, drive-in, which was usually Sonic. And she's like, I just felt seen. And I think that that's just so important because there are conversations that we need to constantly be having. It goes back to the non-negotiables and our mission statement and just, keeping these things in front of our kids.
I've seen my wife be so tired. And we're about ready to go to bed and the kids will come in and I know how tired she is, and it doesn't matter. She will be fully present and she will listen to the kids and she will give them a platform. I'm not real good at that. This thing right here, Tara has been on me. I call this the weapon of mass distraction right here. And I have, not that I'm against as a parent, being on your phone, but just being mindful that you only have your kids for a little bit of time.
Yes.
And you read me something that I just thought was it shifted my perspective.
Yeah.
And I wish somebody would have told me this when my kids were little.
I posted this and it almost made me cry. It was really hard. So it said, we only get 12 spring breaks. This is per child. 13 first days of school, 12 Easter baskets, 20 tooth fairy visits, 1 first date, 1 to 2 proms, and 1 to 2 chances to see them in a cap and gown. If that's not perspective, I don't know what is. And it really is. I mean, it goes by so fast, and you really hope that the work that you're doing is leaving an amazing legacy, not only for your kids, but for your kids' kids, and then hopefully on to their kids' kids' kids.
Yeah.
So it's like, it really is a generational blessing that you're handing down. And so putting the time in is so worth it.
Yeah. And then communication styles, going back to that, it's like you don't communicate to a 13-year-old like you communicate with your 3-year-old.
Yeah, for sure.
So the different ages and stages of how you communicate are so important.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing, as I look back as a dad, is just that availability of like unplugging from all of my different worlds that I'm involved in, including ministry.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I'm a big advocate of ministry, obviously, right? But I also believe there are seasons that God has us in. And if you have a bunch of little kids, those kids are only in those stages for just a little bit of time. So my expectation, especially on the dads, is like, no, you know, you got to serve the kingdom of God. You got to be down at the church every night. Like, no way, dude. Like, there's going to be plenty of time for that. But right now, like, you've got a lot of things that you're doing with your kids in this season of their life. So going back to communication for a second, because this is, I believe, a big one, especially with our culture. Like, kids being raised up in the church with godly Christian parents, you know, through the eras that we have seen, you know, kids being raised in the church, parents have been really good and dogmatic about what they should do and shouldn't do, but parents haven't done a really good job of telling them why they shouldn't do this.
We use the because I said so.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of questions out there, and so I think we've done a good job of explaining the why, but we haven't done a perfect job.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so important too to let our kids make mistakes while they're in our home so that they can hopefully learn when they're out of our home to be able to decipher why we say the things we say, why we choose to do the things that we do. And also, I think it's so important too that we just model apologizing for our kids, because none of us get it perfect.
No.
We're all going to mess up. And if anybody's going to realize that, it's going to be the people that live in your own home. So I read a quote the other day that says, apologizing does not undermine your authority. It actually establishes it. And I wish I would have heard that earlier, because I feel like I struggle with that. I feel like I definitely thought that if I apologized to my kids, I was it was going to undermine my authority. And but it really sets such a great example of humility for your kids.
And the times that we've done it, I mean, I look back when the kids were little and just say, hey, daddy was wrong on that.
Yeah.
And I've even used it.
You were definitely better at that than I was, though.
Yeah.
I definitely struggle with that a little bit.
But when I did do it, it was like the reaction to get from the kids, like the grace
it is.
that the kids give in those moments.
For sure.
And think about that you're really like leveling grace up in your home as like this virtue.
Yeah.
That grace goes both ways.
It does. And it's so important to learn. Such a great thing to teach your kids.
One of the things that your dad taught us a long time ago, he said, save your nose for the big stuff and try to say yes as often as you can. And that always stuck with me, because you know, I used to be a drill sergeant for like how the kids like would clean their rooms, like even when they were little, and you were just like, that's really not that big a deal.
Just shut the door.
Yeah, just shut the door. So I always thought that was a great point. And I think that's something that parents should like really keep in mind, because
don't sweat the small stuff.
You can just be on your kid, on them, and there will come a moment where they will just begin resenting you because it's always negative. So just be careful of that and try to celebrate the good things, and don't sweat the small stuff. Let's talk a minute about balancing priorities.
Okay.
Because I think that's a big one too.
It is.
Especially in this like really fast-paced culture that we live in here in Southern California. So what would you say is a good balanced priority system? Because you've been a good measuring device for me, because when I'm out of balance, she's the whistleblower. She's like, hey dude.
I'm good at that.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. But I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I think it's very challenging, especially when your kids are little, to keep that proper priority in line. I think that, it's supposed to be God, then your spouse, then your kids. And I think that's challenging when your kids are little. I think it's very easy to make your kids an idol and put them above, your spouse, and sometimes above God. And so I think it's just, it's very good to remember that under God then comes your spouse, and to take time
Yeah.
to invest in that relationship. I remember hearing at a couples retreat, and it so stuck with me. They said it starts with the two of you and it ends with the two of you. And I think that that is just so important to remember to feed your marriage, because there is such a thing as a empty nest divorce. I was just reading about that this week, and you don't want to be that person. You want to make sure that you still have something in common, and you haven't stuffed down these issues and not dealt with them when your kids move out.
And I see this new phenomenon in our culture where kids are being elevated so high that it's kind of like what the Bible calls idolatry. And it's like, I'm for, like, obviously you want to give your kid the most, I guess, great experience possible.
Yeah,
but
all the sports.
Yeah, but when I start seeing like their relationship with God being sacrificed and other things being sacrificed in the name of like raising these kids and giving your kids all of these privileges or opportunities, it's like a red flag. Like even like we felt that tension with Josiah when he was in club soccer.
Yeah.
Like all the tournaments that were demanding he miss Sundays, and then the practices that he was missing youth group. And like I was like falling into this little routine, and my son had to tell me like, Dad, I really don't want to miss youth group. And when your kid is telling you that, like, I don't care, that scholarship at college is not worth losing your kid through the process where they don't get the grounding that they should be getting in their church community. So I see this happening so often that it's scary, because then the kid goes to college, you've worked so hard, the kid goes to college, they have no foundation of their faith, and they get totally swallowed up by culture. So as we wrap up in our living room, Tara, what would be that final piece of advice or that little piece of wisdom that you would want to impart on parents?
So I think that your parenting is always going to change as time goes on. And that's where we're at now. We're empty nesters, and so our kids are no longer needing us for all their little things. So we have more of an adult-to-adult relationship. And so I'm reading a book right now called Living with Your Adult Children, and it has been such an eye-opener. And just to give you an example, one of the chapters is called You're Fired, which is a little harsh, but I like to think you're promoted. So
that's good.
Our relationship is more like an adult-to-adult now, so we're trying to really learn the USA. I'm constantly telling Jim USA, unsolicited advice.
You're better at it than me.
I'm definitely better at it than you. I'm always telling Jim, no, USA.
Yeah, there's a lot of moments in parenting that you learn to filter and bite your lip a lot.
For sure, because the end goal, we're right at the end of it. We want to make sure, again, that home is a place that kids want to come home to. So we want to make sure that this is a place they always want to come to. And if we fill it with a lot of criticism, it's not going to be a fun place for them to come home to. And our kids are some of the absolute funnest. So
yeah, they're the most
pretty
fun.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being an amazing mom and for allowing us to raise amazing humans that are
you've done
now
a pretty good job as well,
making a difference in the world. So hopefully that helps you guys.